Hello and welcome. Today we're going to test and review the new system from INNOVV, which is their K7 Dashcam type camera system for our motorbikes. But what you see here before you, this is their K5, which is without doubt their best selling and most popular. It's the most premium version that they offer. And this is their K6, which comes in two versions. There's a motorcycle version and there's also a pedal bike version, which you can fit to your mountain bikes. And I think that's what I'm going to do with this system later in the series when I review this camera. But today we're going to focus on the K7. Now, with all these types of systems from all the different manufacturers, with regards to dashcam type systems, where there's a camera mounted on the rear and a camera mounted on the front, you should have a clear understanding that these are not action cameras. Action cameras, the cameras that we mount to our crash helmets and maybe we mount to our handlebars, they're a completely different thing. If you were to compare them just in terms of image quality, resolution, and stabilization, these are in a completely different class. And it is not a comparison. It's not a fair comparison between these systems because they're aimed at doing completely different things. The benefit of this sort of system is once you've got them set up on your motorbike, you've spent your time, you've mounted it correctly, you've got your angles of your camera correctly, you've gone through your app, you've chosen your resolution and your frame rate to match the type of riding you do and the environment you ride in and the type of weather you ride in, and you get it all set up, which takes a little bit of time. Once that's done, you're finished. From that point onwards, whenever you jump on your motorbike, turn the ignition on, the camera system automatically starts up and those two cameras start a looping process with the video, and it just constantly records everything that's going on front and rear, so that should, if the unfortunate happens and we are involved in an accident or an accident happens behind or in front of us that we're not directly involved in, we can record that footage so that there is some way to provide some evidential evidence as to what happened during an accident. Because quite often, as most motorcyclists will find out, people that drive cars that don't ride motorbikes, they all think we're crazy guys that ride around way too fast on noisy motorbikes, and quite often the finger gets pointed at the motorcyclist being the cause of the accident or the person that created the problem in the first place, which quite often isn't the case. So these camera systems help prove what's going on front and rear, and they're on a constant loop all the time. And the simplest and easiest way to explain this is whatever the box says in terms of specification of the camera system, ultimately it comes down to the video quality. Is it bright? Is it clear? Is it in focus? And is it shaking and vibrating around? So this is what I'm going to test first. So I think what we'll do now, we'll have a look at the contents of the box and let's move forward. So what you see laid out in front of you is the contents of the box, and what we're going to start with are the instructions. Now, INNOVV are exceptionally good for writing very clear, precise, well-written instructions, and just look at the size of these instructions. We can't have a problem reading these. Sometimes we get our products with little tiny instructions, but not from INNOVV. They're very clear, precise and easy to read, with diagrams and layouts and how-tos, along with the mounting instructions for the cameras front and rear. And then if we flip it over, we've also got more instructions, where to download the app for our mobile phone, both an Apple and an Android, so that we've got adjustment and access to the camera system once it's mounted on the bike. And then we've got other additional information. There's also information about how to do the firmware update once we've installed it on our bike to make sure that we're running the very latest software. So let's start at the beginning. In the center here, we have the DVR unit, the digital video recording unit. And in this side, on the left-hand side here, we have our waterproof slot for the micro SD card. Now, as you can see from the DVR unit, we've got 3 cable connections on the left and we've got 3 cable connections on the right. So let's start with the left-hand side. So what's very interesting, and actually it's a very, very clever idea, is what INNOVV have done is they've used color coding to help us make our connections to the rest of the system. So we really can't get this wrong. So over here, we've got our first black connector, which is going to go to our remote control module, which we're going to mount up somewhere in the front, close to the handlebars of the motorbike. We've then got our yellow connector, which is this one here, which is for the GPS unit. And then on the left-hand side, the lower section here, we've got our external microphone, which I'm also going to be testing to see what it's like recording audio on top of the video footage that we're going to take. And then across the bottom here, we've got our installation kit, and we'll get to that in more detail while we do the installation. And then over here on the right hand side, with our blue matched connectors, and this is our connection to the motorbike. Now we have 3 cables. Again, it's fairly straightforward. We've got a negative and a positive. The positive is fused. We're going to connect this direct to the battery. And then this yellow cable here, this is our switched 12-volt feed. In other words, we need to find a feed from the motorbike that comes live when we turn the ignition on, and that's going to be fairly straightforward to find. But importantly, when that gets its signal from the bike to say the ignition's turned on and you're about to start the motorbike, it then triggers and fires off the system to start up and start recording. And we'll talk about this when we get to the installation itself. And then finally, over here on the right hand side are our 2 cameras. Now the cameras themselves are identical in terms of performance. The difference between these 2 is one has a 1.5 meter cable and the second one has a 2 meter cable. And what this does, it gives us some flexibility in terms of mounting. So now we're going to look at the actual video footage, and this is where we really get to see what the system is like. Now on the K7 system we have 3 primary shooting modes. We have 1080p at 30 frames per second with electronic image stabilization. We also have 1080p but at 60 frames per second, and we also have 2K at 30 frames per second. Now it's important to understand that the electronic image stabilization on this one up here is only available in one mode, which is 1080p at 30 frames per second. We also need to manage our expectation because there is no comparison to an action camera, for example. They're in a completely different category, and I highlighted that right at the beginning. I've made some notes. I've got some clips to show you in a moment. I've got a couple of video clips and some stills that I took from those videos, and I've got a video so we can have a look at number plates and things like that. But a couple of things to highlight. So to test this thoroughly, what I decided to do was to pick possibly the most difficult environment for this sort of camera to operate and function smoothly in. And that is fast moving. So I was doing lots of transitions from left to right. It was a really bright sunny day, and I went through a small woodland valley. So there was constant lighting changes in terms of one moment it was incredibly bright, the next moment it was incredibly dark, and this probably is the most difficult environment in which this sort of camera has to work. And if it can sort of work in that environment, for the rest of the time in the towns, the streets and the cities, I know we're going to be fine because I've got some other footage to show you later. The 2K system at 30 frames per second did a brilliant job, and I was really impressed with that footage. So let's first have a look at the most extreme footage I've got. This is not going to look at its best, but just be aware this is the most difficult that the camera has to cope with. So the first one I did was 1080p. 60 frames per second, and this doesn't have image stabilization. Now on a small device like a mobile phone, this image is going to look absolutely fine. On a small tablet, an 8 or a 9-inch tablet, the footage is also going to look fine. But then when you move up to, for example, a 17-inch laptop, you're really going to start to notice the difference. So the second one I'm going to show you is 1080p, 30 frames per second, but with electronic image stabilization. Now it doesn't initially look very different, but when I do screen captures, image captures from this footage, it is a lot clearer to make out the road I'm riding on and what's going on around me. And then the final one is going to be 2K at 30 frames per second, and you can see there's already a vast difference in terms of clarity and detail in that footage. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you another clip. This was in a different area on again a bright sunny day, but not in the woods, not in the forest. And I'll put that on now. Now what you can see as we're coming up behind this vehicle, I can very clearly make out the number plate. This is filmed at 2K at 30 frames per second. Now during my testing, what I found was in 2K 30 frames per second, I can read number plates on the vehicles in front or behind me up to about 30 meters from my position. Now after 30 meters it gets quite hard to make out the number plates, and a lot depends on vibration and speed and lighting conditions. So I've got a couple of examples. What I did, I went through a village. I tried to find a village where they didn't mind me going up and down all afternoon doing filming. So what I've got here, this first image, is a still frame from 1080p, 60 frames per second. And on the left-hand side, that car on the left-hand side is 50 meters away from my motorbike. Now, I can't make out the number plate on that car. Now, the next image, this is again 1080p, 30 frames per second with electronic image stabilization turned on, 50 meters from the bike, and I still can't make out that number plate on the left-hand side. Now the third image, again a frame from the footage that I took, this is 2K, 30 frames per second, I'm the same distance from the car, and on the left-hand side I can just about make out the number plate, and if I crop into that image, it's not really easy to make out the number plate, but I can just make out the number plate. So somewhere in between 30 and 50 meters from you, front or rear on the motorbike, for me is the point at which I just can't make out number plates in the footage. And I think that's probably quite acceptable for the cost of the system, the performance that these cameras front and rear, bearing in mind they're identical, provide. So let's move on to the next section. I've got another video clip to show you in low light. Now, not everybody has an adventure touring bike, and not everybody wants to connect all the options that come in the kit from INNOVV with the K7 system. So for those of you that have a classic bike, maybe for example you've got something like a Roadster, a BMW R9T, Kawasaki Z900 RS, or maybe you've got a classic motorbike, and what you're really looking for is a sleek, discreet, stealthy install with just those two cameras working and the system recording on a loop to keep you safe should something happen on your motorbike. So on the DVR module itself, we have 6 connections. The 3 most important ones are obviously your 2 camera connections and then our power connection. But the other 3, the microphone, the GPS, and the remote control, I wanted to find out if I remove and disconnect those other items, does the system still work? So that those of you that have an intention to have a nice, clean, stealthy install, maybe on a classic motorbike, you can do it without having all these other things connected. And you absolutely can. So I'll put some footage up now. The footage is going to serve 2 purposes. The footage that I showed you earlier on in the video was on a bright sunny day. Bright blue skies, lots of sunshine. Whereas earlier on today, it was really quite overcast. It rained about 20 minutes after I got back. There was no direct sunlight, so the lighting conditions were very different to the previous test. And actually, the camera set at 2K, 30 frames per second, actually did a really good job in terms of exposing the image correctly. And I was really quite impressed with the footage that I got, bearing in mind this is only 2K and it's not 4K. So we can clearly see it is possible to have a sleek install with the K7. So what you're going to have to do is when you start your bike up in that stealth mode without those 3 items connected, your microphone, your GPS and your remote control, you're going to need to use the app. So once the bike's up and running, give your phone a couple of moments to connect to the motorbike, go into the settings and click on the camera icon and just make sure front and rear camera are recording, and then you're going to be safe to go. But you can do it, you will get a very sleek install. So what are my final thoughts on INNOVV's new K7 camera system? Well, before we get into that, I think what we ought to do, because I know there's going to be lots of questions, people trying to decide whether you go for the premium K5 kit or the new K7. So let's just briefly discuss the differences between the two. So the K5 does have some advantages. It does have a much better sensor on the front that records an image in 4K. But importantly, it is quite a bulky unit because that DVR unit that we've mounted centrally on this bike is in fact attached to the camera on the front on the K5. So you're going to need to find somewhere to mount it. And if you're trying to have a nice, clean, simple, stealthy install, the K5 system really isn't the one to use, because you've got that great big module you've got to try and hide somewhere at the front of the motorbike. Now, if we look at the K7 system, which we've just installed, that has 2K cameras which are identical front and rear. So in that comparison, just on terms of resolution, you're going to get an improvement on the rear camera compared to the K5, and you get a slightly less quality camera on the front compared to the K5. We're dropping from 4K to 2K. But does that actually make a difference? Well, I don't think it does. I think what INNOVV have done by giving us a 2K camera with a good quality lens, with low light capabilities, it actually is perfect. I think this is just enough. I don't think there really is a need to have a 4K camera on the front. It's extra cost when we purchase the system, and for most people that are using this, this is really just a looping system to keep us safe in case something happens while we're out on our motorbikes and an accident happens in front of us or behind us, and we can record it. And that 2K camera is going to do a perfect job. In terms of image quality, I'm quite happy with a 2K image front and rear, and as we've seen from the samples, it's actually quite good in low light conditions, so I'm very pleased with that. Installation, this is the only thing you need to be a little bit careful with. The K7, what we fitted on the GS, is much simpler and easier to fit than the K5. However, what I found during the installation was I had quite a bit of trouble trying to find a location for that DVR unit. So initially I thought that I could put the DVR unit underneath the rider's seat, and I'll put some pictures up so you can have a look in a moment. And I was actually going to make a full installation guide, but actually looking back at the videos I've got on the channel, I've got quite a lot of videos showing you how to take all the different panels off, so I don't think really there's a need for me to do it. And also, when we think about the last INNOVV product review that I did, which was for the blind spot detection system, I showed you how to take everything off, all the tools that you need, and the process for installing the K7 is almost identical to installing the blind spot detection system in terms of panels and screws and locations and cable routing. So I don't think there's much point going through another video. Now, this DVR unit, I tried it underneath the seat, but because the DVR unit is about that size, it's about 12 millimeters thick. What I found was, with the seat in the high position, there's no problem. The DVR unit can live underneath here. But with the seat in the low position, the seat base was pressing on top of the DVR, which is not acceptable. It's going to cause problems. So then I tried to find a location underneath the passenger seat, and I had the same sort of problem. There's not enough room under the passenger seat for me to be able to get to all those cables, and importantly, I need to be able to get to that micro SD card so I can take the card out, reformat it, do software and firmware updates, and take video footage off. So what I ended up doing, and I'll put some pictures up, on the side here, on the left hand side of the GS, there is a power supply outlet, a DIN socket. So what I decided to do was take out that DIN plug on this left hand side, which enabled me to take the DVR unit, move it and put it vertically in down the side of this seat. And it actually was a perfect place for it, because it means I can then get to the top, or rather the side, and get to that micro SD card, and then all the cables fitted up the side of the bike. So I'll put some pictures up so you can have a look. So the installation itself, once I'd figured out where to put that the DVR unit, the installation really was fairly straightforward. Where do you buy? Well, as I mentioned in the very first INNOVV product review that I did a couple of months ago, the best place to buy your INNOVV products is either direct from INNOVV themselves or from an approved distributor. So what I'll do, the choice is yours. I'll put links in the video description below so you can have a look and you can choose where you buy your products from, the K5, the K7, whatever you want to buy. And any information that I've forgotten to mention on the video, I'll put in the description below. So thank you very much for your time. I have actually quite enjoyed this K7 system, and I was thinking about removing it and fitting the K5, but I think actually I'm going to leave the K7 on here because I'm quite happy with it, and I'll probably put the K5 on a different motorbike and then do a review of the K5 versus the K6 at a later date. Anyway, enough of me talking. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.